Amethyst Steel is a deck that's been all over the place in the current meta. It started out by crushing people at SSG and CCS early on, but then completely disappeared from the top cut at the Pro Play Summit in Denver, Colorado. And now with Bologna just behind us, we know that 276 players chose to bring it in there, making it the fourth most represented deck, and then it actually converted fairly well in day 2, where it was 14.8% of the field. And then for the top 8, though, 3 out of 8, or a whopping 37.5% of the field was representing Amethyst Steel. So overall, it showed very well in Bologna, and some very well-known players chose to bring it in. So given that we've got more challengers coming up and set championships, etc., I wanted to know more about what made this deck tick in the current meta, and I wanted to do it by learning from one of the very best. Thiago is a player who's become known for this color combo. He won several big tournaments, and he actually took this color combination to the top 32 in Bologna, a very, very good finish, and I managed to catch up with him 2 days before the summit to pick his brain a little bit. Let's hear what he has to say. How would you describe this deck's identity to someone who's never played it before?
Yeah, so I think the coolest thing about the deck is that you're always able to adapt to what your opponent's presenting to you, because your deck's so flexible and can do so many different things. But mainly what it is you're a deck that's trying to have a strong early game, and that's by using characters like Captain Hook and Calhoun, and then any slew of your 3-drops are all strong, like your Genie Satisfied Dragon or you're the White Rose, anything to combat the board early, which allow you to hold the board to bridge you into your mid game, where you have all of these robust like card draw tools in a meta where so few decks have access to this. So where you have cards like Genie and Dumbo and Yzma and Doc, and all of the other decks have like maybe 1 or 2 different cards that gain them card advantage, but you have such this strong early game that nobody can get quick advantages against you, and then you bridge it into this mid game where you're drawing so many cards, and it allows you to put so many bodies on the board. And in a meta where people don't have access to sweepers like Be Prepared, then your board just gets really big across turns like 5, 6, 7, and 8, because you're just drawing so many bodies that eventually you put the game into a spot where they can never stop you from questing with like 8. If you quest with 8 characters and they only have 4 characters on board, like maybe they'll have a removal effect for 1 of them, and then 3 of your characters are going to ready up the next turn and be able to quest again. And so you just create these board states that no deck in the game can deal with.
One of the misconceptions about this deck is that it's designed to go fast, to go wide early, gather lore as quickly as possible, and then perhaps close out the game with some of your burn cards like Giant Cobra or White Rose. There's other Amethyst decks we've seen that pursue this kind of strategy, like the old Emerald Amethyst decks of old, which can go very, very fast. Now, this is not how this deck is designed to work at all. In fact, it's a much more patient game plan with a 3-phase approach that I think Thiago describes very, very well. But it's a deck that's very tricky to pilot, requiring nuanced decision-making throughout the game, as well as expert knowledge of your opponent's deck to minimize the impact of the cards that give them the biggest tempo swings, effectively setting you up for the big finish where you go wide and close things down.
The deck is kind of awkward because when you look at it, you're like, it's a White Rose Giant Cobra deck. Like, I'm trying to get to 20 lore super fast and take them out of the game. But then when you take like a deeper look into the deck has like 6 actions and 9 2-questers, and then it's 45 1-questers. So your deck is actually extraordinarily slow at actually being able to close out the game. So you're really forced into taking these like little micro trades throughout the entire game and getting little advantages through combat and through which cards you decide to ink and which cards you get to keep from not inking, and navigating the game. So you really have to know everything your opponent's trying to do, because you have to set up the best thing to do against it. Otherwise, you won't take full advantage. You have to really make sure you're never letting them get a lot of value out of their cards. So that's things like Bell Accomplished Mystic out of a Blurple deck, and these really swingy cards you have to really keep in check, or maybe Clarabelle 7, the 7 cost in blue-green. So you really have to minimize the best cards in your opponent's deck for swinging the game, and make sure that the game always stays contained, and try to, through that contained game state, create these advantages for yourself. So I think really trying to manage the speed of the game is the most important thing.
So obviously in this 3-stage approach, each phase of the game builds on the phase before it, and if you're unsuccessful in any particular one, you likely won't be able to execute your game plan. So let's talk about phase 1. What are you actually trying to do in the first 4 turns of the game to set yourself up for success and to maintain control of the board? What you're actually trying to do can be boiled down to really 2 things. The first is to build your board every single turn without overextending yourself and burning through too many resources. And the second thing is setting up for a powerful turn 4 Strength of Raging Fire.
Each turn, for the first 4 turns, you're looking to ink and play a character equal to how much ink you have. So on the first turn, you're looking to play a 1 ink character. On the second turn, you're looking to play a 2 ink character. On the third turn, you're looking to play a 3 ink character. And on the fourth turn, you're looking to play a 4 ink character. You don't really need to quest in each of these turns because your deck is built. The most important card in your deck is Strength of Raging Fire. So by questing, you're inviting your opponent to challenge back into you and then forcing you to challenge into them, and then the board becomes really thin, which is not good for you. You want the board to be really cluttered because that empowers your Strength of Raging Fire. And even in the games where you don't have Strength of Raging Fire, you still want to play this way because you don't want to give your opponent the information that you have it. So I would say in the first 4 turns, you're just looking to play the most expensive character you have each turn and keep the board complicated because you're representing Strength of Raging Fire whether you have it or not. And then you're going to get to this point in the game where you're playing these cards like Genie, Dumbo, Yzma, Doc, and if you have Dolores Madrigal or Treasure Guardian, then you're going to end up with a board so overwhelming that you should be able to kind of take the game from there in a way that your opponent can't really deal with super well. In the first few turns, I would say don't really worry about which 1 cost you have or which 2 costs you have or which 3 costs you have. You'll kind of pick up which ones are better in what matchups at a certain point, but the difference between them is not so vast that you need to get rid of your Diablo to look for Captain Hook here. So I would say just focus on making sure you're hitting each point in your mana curve and building out your board, and then questing when you have advantages. And every time your opponent every time they exert a character to quest or challenge, and you can challenge back into them with a character that will banish their character and stay alive, then that's probably something you're interested in doing. And then you'll slowly whittle away at their board while building yours and amass a board that you're able to quest, and they won't be able to take out as many characters as you have. So then some characters will ready back up the next turn and be able to quest again, and you'll eventually be able to close the game out that way.
So knowing that's your early game plan, how do you set yourself up with the altar? Well, it turns out that because this deck is so consistent with around 12 1-drops, around 12 2-drops, and around 15 3-drops, depending on exactly how it's built, you can actually be fairly aggressive with your altar and look for key cards like the ones that Thiago mentioned earlier, Strength of Raging Fire and Genie being the 2 big ones.
What you're really looking for is to connect your 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and then you want to play a strong 4-drop like Genie, and then sing Strength of Raging Fire that same turn. And so we're really trying to connect these pieces in our starting hand. So with the redundancy of our early characters, we can get this pretty consistently. And so we're really looking for our key cards, which are Genie and Strength of Raging Fire. So what you're going to look for when you don't know what they're playing is a 1-cost character, a 2-cost character. It doesn't really matter which, but when you're going first in the blind, then the Palace Guard is the best. Calhoun is always your best 2-cost, and if you're going second and you don't know what they're playing, Captain Hook is your best 1-drop. So it can kind of vary a little bit that way, but you're looking for a 1-cost, 2-cost, Strength of Raging Fire, and Genie. So we do want a 3-cost, but our deck plays 14 or 15 3-costs, that it's actually better for us to ship away a 3-cost even in our starting hand if we don't have Strength of Raging Fire, because Strength of Raging Fire is so important to our deck's game plan. So the odds that in the maybe 3 or 4 cards we send back, plus the next 3 cards before turn 3, and those 6 cards that we find one of our 14 3-costs or something is pretty high. So it's actually better to get away the 3-cost, even though you're trying to connect 1-cost, 2-cost, 3-cost, 4-cost, and Strength. I think right now in the meta we're in kind of a weird place where I think it's because of the cards that were chosen to be reprinted and the ones that weren't. Some of the decks have cards that are so much stronger than the other cards in their deck. The best 5 cards in your deck are so much stronger than the worst 5 cards in your deck. So it becomes really important to alter pretty aggressively in this meta. So for us, it's looking for cards like Strength of Raging Fire and Genie, as opposed to being stuck with these mediocre the White Roses and things like that.
So I asked Thiago about mistakes that he often sees people making with this color combo that lose them games, and he highlighted 2 in particular. Mistake number 1 is not hitting that subscribe button down there right now because you want to keep up with the latest Lorcana content from us. I'm just kidding, he didn't say that, but seriously, your support means a lot, and we'd appreciate it if you'd follow along. Okay, now for the 2 mistakes that he actually said. What's interesting about these 2 mistakes is that they're likely caused by people's experiences with this color combo in previous metas. But because certain cards have shifted out, it actually changes your lines and the way that you should approach certain turns and certain cards. So the 2 things that he focused on are 1, people wanting to go wide early, specifically with the 1-on-1, 2-on-2. I call this the Mo Shamblin special from the North American Championship. And then also misusing Doc and not understanding what he's actually there for and relying on him too early, turning the game into kind of a Doc roulette rather than relying on some of your more consistent cards.
I would say the first one right now is playing double 1-drops on turn 2. It's something that we became so accustomed to in last meta because your 1-drops were Shurtbox Followers, Magic Broom, and Diablo, which always become a better card later if you play them. Whereas right now, if your turn 2 is like Palace Guard, Captain Hook, you're never getting those cards back. You just played like very low quality cards into the game, and those cards in the previous format were also followed up by things like Merlin Crab and Madam Mim Fox. So even if you had a 0-1 Diablo on turn 2, it's still threatening to attack their board very dangerously with a Crab or a Fox coming in on turn 3. And now we don't have access to that. So by playing 2 1-drops on turn 2, you end up expending your resources so quickly, and they're so low impact on the board because they don't represent good trades into your opponent's characters, and they don't threaten becoming a better card by banishing themselves to draw a card like our 1 cost used to. So I think since people were used to playing them in the last set, that's kind of carried over now, and now you don't really want to do it unless you're playing against something like Sapphire Emerald, which has the Clarabelle 7, and so then you play kind of differently because you're trying to use your hand quickly. But in general, you're not looking to do that. I also think a lot of people focus too much on the dock, whereas our deck, going into turns 4, 5, and 6, and 7, we have the most card draw of any deck in the game. So it's actually better to focus on playing like Genies and Yzmas and Dumbos or Treasure Guardians and Doloreses if those are in your list. And you want to just keep building your resources with these more high value cards throughout the mid game, rather than trying to dump your hand to play Dock, which I think is another thing that carried over from last set, because you used to be able to just play your Dock and then banish the 2 Shurtbox Followers on your board, draw 4 cards, and then you had like 3 other Docks in your deck and 8 bounce cards to bounce and replay your Dock. So you used to always have resources after you played your Dock. Right now, if you rush your Dock and play it on turn 4, then if you just draw like Captain Hook and a Genie Satisfied Dragon, the 3-mana steel card, then you're kind of just out of resources for the entire game, and you're held down by like 1 Madam Mim Elephant or like 1 character plus a Bell Accomplished Mystic. And so I think that is like the main thing that I see with the decks. People get focused on building these wide boards, which is something you want to do, but you don't want to do it on turn 4 or 5. You want to do it on turn 7 or 8. And so by rushing your Dock, you kind of give away the consistency of your deck, which is the most important aspect of it. And instead, you become like kind of this roulette wheel where like, I hope my Dock draws me into another Dock and then I'll win the game. But you're giving up the consistency, which is your biggest strength. So I think that is like the biggest like no is trying to rush your, like, it should be like a last resort kind of thing. Like, my hand didn't come together at all, I have to do this, as opposed to like something you want to build your core game plan around.
So I have to admit, I dug in a little bit more here to try to figure out why Thiago is so successful with this deck and why others might not be finding the same success. And I stumbled into something really interesting, which is how Thiago views the game as swinging back and forth between 2 things, building board advantage or building hand advantage. And some people lose games because they fail to identify when to switch between building one and building the other.
Yeah, I would say the easiest trap to fall into is kind of misevaluating what you need in the spot. So a lot of times that means sort of playing more for the board than playing for your hand, or playing more for your hand than you need to play for the board. So you kind of need to evaluate how many resources your opponent has in their hand and on their board, and what the best way to respond to that is. So if they have no cards in hand and have a really big board, then you need to ink your most expensive cards and play all your cheap cards so you can keep up because if the game goes on for a long time, you're going to end up with more resources because they have no cards in hand. So you just need to defend the game until you're able to realize your card advantage. Whereas if your opponent has 10 cards in hand because they saying second star to the right, then you need to get to the board and try to end the game quickly because they're going to win the resource battle. And then if it's a game where the board is kind of stalled and both players are very thin on resources, you need to make sure you're not like inking cards like Dumbo or Yzma just to play out a little Diablo or Captain Hook or something, because the board isn't the most important aspect of that game. Now, the hand sizes are the most important aspect, so you need to make sure that you're getting the most out of your cards that maximize your hand size. And so I think I think people can kind of tunnel vision into always playing turns generally around 5 and 6 in the same way, and every single game you have to take a careful evaluation of what's going on and make sure that you're doing the right thing for the cards that both players were dealt.
So let's talk matchups. Which decks are you hoping to see and which decks are you hoping to avoid when you sit down for a big tournament? Well, it turns out when you look at this deck and you look at matchups and talk to players, etc., it turns out that Amethyst Steel is actually pretty average into almost everything. It's fairly consistent. Of course, there are several decks like Emerald Sapphire and Amber Steel, which have draws that just can't be beaten. And so obviously you're hoping for a little luck there and that your opponent just doesn't draw the hand that, I don't know, that you can't overtake. Blurple is also kind of a frustrating matchup because when it gets to that top end, it just is so powerful and so swingy that you probably can't overtake it. What this means is that at any particular tournament, the margin for error is just very, very slim, and you have to execute your game plan each time, not necessarily to perfection, but pretty close to it. But if you do that, and you're very practiced with this deck, and you know your matchups very well, it turns out that Amethyst Steel can be pretty good.
This is like the complicated thing with this deck is that like basically all of your matchups are the same. Like really all of your matchups are somewhere in the like 47 to 53% range. So it's like one of the biggest benefits to the deck, but you're never going to like collect free wins throughout the tournament. With the data we have now, like we can kind of see what decks have been doing well and poorly against each other in tournaments. And I think Purple Steel has been doing poorly into Blurple, which makes sense, right? They're a little bit bigger than you. You can't really rush them down, and you get to the point of the game where they're playing like these Hades and the 8-cost Elsa Spirit of Winter, and they're able to control your board really early with Madame M Elephant and Bell Accomplished Mystic. So Purple Steel tends to struggle into that. I've been doing pretty well in tournaments against it, though I definitely think some of it's good luck and some of it was being more experienced in the matchup. But I think the scariest thing about playing Purple Steel is knowing that Blurple is going to be the most popular deck in the room and that it can be really tricky, especially going second. I think Blurple is so strong into pretty much everything when it goes first that it's really scary to play a deck that you know the deck you're going to play against the most is something you struggle against. But against everything else, I would say you're at least 50% into, which is different than Purple Steel in the past, where like you're pretty much 48% into everything, and so it's kind of a wonky brink. But I think like against blue-green, that's actually the deck I've lost to the most in tournaments, but I don't think that means it's a bad matchup for Purple Steel. I think they have these draws that are so extraordinarily more powerful than you that it's hard for you to like do anything in the game to like catch back up. So then it becomes like you're able to win maybe 80% of the games against a different purple opponent if you're more practiced than they are. But against the blue-green opponent, maybe you can only win like 60% of the games, just because 40% of the time their draw is like so strong that like there's no sequence of draws you can have to combat it. So I think against blue-green, even though I've picked up the most losses to it, I still think it's Purple Steel favored. I just think that it has more to do with like the hand that the blue-green player gets deciding what ends up happening into the game. So it's hard to have like really extraordinary win rates against it, even if it's above 50%. I think Amber Steel's like a pretty reasonable matchup for you. You can definitely lose. They have these really strong draws with Aurora and Tiana, and if they get more Tianas than you get Strength of Raging Fires, they will win the game. But if you guys get the same amount, or you get more Strength of Raging Fires, you will win the game. So you're pretty favored in that sense. I think the list that Sky's popularized with the Troubadour is like better because then they're able to get the initiative on singing Strength to take out our singers. So if they play Troubadour on turn 2 and we play our Singer 3 on turn 3, they're able to sing Strength of Raging Fire on our Singer 3 before we can sing Strength of Raging Fire on their Tiana or such. So I think that recently it swung much closer to even, but I think Purple Steel slipped pretty comfortable in that matchup. I would say that that's like the biggest reason to play Purple Steel is your Amber Steel matchup. And the last big deck I am missing is the Mirror. The Mirror is obviously 50%. I think the Mirror is really miserable to play because the game gets really snowbally with the evasives, and so it's not one that I enjoy playing, but I mean, nobody enjoys playing the Mirror, right? And I think this weekend we're going to see a lot of Dogs. Dogs has been, since the end of the first wave of North American tournaments around the third week, Dogs has been dominating online with frequently having all 3 of the top players on the leaderboard all being Dogs players. So I think it's poised for a pretty big weekend, and Purple Steel is very, very good into Dogs. It's by far their worst matchup, and they have very few ways to play. They need to get the really, really top percentage of their hands to beat you, where they play multiple Tramp 7s on turn 4 and then have Under the Sea and maybe a Scrump to go with it. So I would say you're super comfortable in that matchup, and I think that that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to play Purple Steel again, is because I think there's going to be a lot more Dogs this weekend than we've seen before.
So when we look at an ink pair in a particular meta, sometimes we see a lot of variation within those 2 colors, and decks can be doing wildly different things, particularly in the endgame. Amethyst Steel is not one of those. It's actually very consistent in its build and what it's trying to do. But that doesn't mean that there isn't room for some meta calls and for some tech here and there. Particularly in the 1, 2, and 3 slots, there are some different cards that you can move to depending on what you're expecting to see in a particular meta. And opinions have changed a little bit over time over the last month about which cards are best in this particular build.
Yeah, so this is the 4th major tournament I'm playing this season, and every single week I've had a different deck list. So in the first week I was playing the 5-cost Jasmine that's evasive on your turn, and that was because I thought it was pretty well positioned against the purple decks that I thought people were going to play, and I didn't think there was going to be as much Blurple as there ended up being in the meta and things like that. So it's getting Hades now. So that kind of made its way out of my deck. And now in that first week, I was playing the Madam Mim Tiny Adversary, the Skater. And then there ended up not being as much Amber Steel as people were anticipating before the set came out. And so that's a card that made its way out of the deck for the CCS weekend. And then now that Sky has won with Amber Steel, it's popularized again, and so the Madam Mim Tiny Adversary becomes good again because it's strong against the Daisy Duck openers and stuff like that. And so I would say if you're expecting a lot of aggro decks, the Rafiki was in my Denver list, and Rafiki is really excellent against all these Daisy Duck decks, all of the Dogs and Amber Steels, and it can be okay against the other Steel decks because they have so many cards like Calhoun and so many 3-mana 3/3s that they need to set up to sing their 3-cost songs, like the new Green Steel deck, for example, with Max Goof and Mother Knows Best. As well as it being okay against blue-green because 3 is kind of an interesting number where you're able to quest with all your characters, and then if you have a Rafiki up, then their shift characters don't really want to attack into your random 3/3s because then they get cleaned up by the Rafiki, and it's not the best value for them, especially if they had a shift card under it and shifted on top, so now they're losing 2 cards for your random 3-drop that already got some value in your 1-drop. So I think Rafiki is a card that could certainly make its way back in. It's pretty much good in every single matchup except Blurple, but Blurple's the most common deck, so that's where we see a lot of people opting for Palace Guard because it's much better in that matchup. And I think I'm probably going to stick to playing Palace Guard just because of the Blurple matchup. Then the 2-drop slot is always shifting. You always play your Calhouns, 3 or 4 depending on how many uninkables you have access to, depending on if you're playing Fire the Cannons, for example, then you might opt to play 3 Calhouns, whereas if you're not playing Fire the Cannons, you would maybe play the 4th. But the other 2-drop that you play, generally these decks play about 8, is really, really low quality. So we see cards like Raja, the Jafar or Smee that are these 2-mana 3/2s that are evasive in your turn. I would say that that's the most popular one that people are opting towards. I think it's the most medium. I think it's a 4.5 out of 10 across the board, whereas the Raja can be really excellent against the yellow aggressive decks. It can really take over the game. because it has 50% more health, right? And 50% more health on turn 2 is like huge. So you're able to like take all these value trades into their characters and really snowball the board starting early. I posted a list that was playing Arthur Wart when there was a lot of blue-green popular, which is a card that's made its way out now since blue-green's not as popular, but the deck has so few 2-questers that you kind of want to fill in that 2-cost slot with something so that you have some more consistency in your deck, but it's also much better off the top than these other ones because it quests for twice as much. And then also the Madam M Tiny Adversary, which we talked a little bit about already. And then in the 3-cost slot, we sometimes see people playing like these Peats, which I'm really not a fan of. I think your deck is just so bad at pressuring them that you're not really able to leverage the Peat like you used to. And you have so much, you don't have like all of these Chernobogs, Magic Broom, Diablo, Friends on the Other Side, a Rabbit, like cards to bounce. So it's much harder to time your Peat to their board wipe because you don't have as many cards in hand. So like by turn 5, when turn 5 rolls around, you have 1 or 2 cards in hand. You don't have things to spend 5 or 6 ink on, and then things to spend 5 or 6 ink on next turn, and then have the Peat for the next turn. You just kind of have to play your Peat on curve, and if you're not getting anything out of its effect, it's a pretty low quality body. And the decks where that play clears, like blue-green, also just have a bunch of 7-cost characters. So if you play Pete and they just Hades your other character, and you have 2 questers on board and you're at 6 quest, or you can quest to like 8 or 9 or 10 or something, and it doesn't really snowball the game. And you also don't have the bounce cards to replay it, which is really when Pete was at his best. So that's really the only other option. People sometimes play at the 3-cost slot. In the 4-cost slot, people usually play about 10, 11, or 12 characters, usually 4 Dumbos and 4 Genies. And then the other slot is either Treasure Guardian or Yzma or Dolores. I think all are fine. I think I'm playing Yzma right now just because I think Fire the Cannons is like a reasonably positioned card, and Fire the Cannons is like somewhat low quality that it's kind of ruins your plan of getting all these incremental advantages. So you kind of need Yzma to get a more swingy advantage than Treasure Guardian or Dolores would give you. So the Fire the Cannons is sort of the reason why Yzma is making the cut for me now. And then in the 5-cost slot, there's the Bell Accomplished Mystic, which is pretty standard to be 2 now. People were kind of jumbling the numbers up and around, but I think most people have settled on 2. It's just really important in especially the purple steel mirror. It's super high impact, and without it, sometimes you can like manage to lose the game going first against Blurple, which is like really devastating. So she really secures that matchup. Mostly in the games going first. She can be a little bit awkward going second, but and she also has good utility against Amber Steel, sometimes being able to take out things like a Rhino, or just being able to clean up their characters that are coming in readied when they're at like 17, 18, or 19 lore, and you have to deal with their top deck every single turn while you try to set up your own 20 lore. And then usually we see these decks playing about 6 actions. Usually it's 4 Strength of Raging Fires, and then their choice of 2 Hypnotic Strength or Fire the Cannons. I think both are fine. Hypnotic Strength is more flexible, right, because it's inkable, and Fire the Cannons is slightly is a better card, but being uninkable is like such a downside that we a lot of the times don't see it. I think when you play Hypnotic Strength in your deck, it's like the 59th and 60th best card, whereas Fire the Cannon's like the 43rd and 44th or something like that. So it's much better, but you don't really want to ink a good card in your deck to play the 44th best card. Like if you have to ink like in Elsa or something because you have to play your hand out and you have this Fire the Cannons, it's like pretty devastating, and your deck like is trying to get all of these little advantages. So if you're forcing yourself to like ink a higher quality card because you have this uninkable Fire the Cannons that you need to deploy, it can be pretty rough. And I think the card is not like as good right now as people had been pushing. It's a card that we've seen a ton of in the last few weeks as a reaction to like blue-green, because it takes out their little Clarabelle, their little shift targets. And I think it's really excellent against Amber Steel and kind of not that good against everything else. Against blue-green, if they just draw 2 little Clarabelles or 1 little Clarabelle and 1 3-cost Clarabelle, then it does nothing. Against Blurple, like sometimes it can be okay to get their Madam M Elephant bounce target before it's deployed on their turn 3, but it's just generally a very poor card against Blurple, and it's if you don't see it in the first turn or 2 and you end up drawing into it later, it's like can be really devastating and completely ruin your game. So I think Amber Steel's like enough of a reason to play a couple copies, but I would probably not go overboard on the Fire the Cannons.
So given all that, given the tricky Blurple matchup and the fact that this deck requires such a high skill level to pilot properly, why should you play this in this meta? Well, to answer that, let's hear why Thiago chooses to play it. So what do you like? You're kind of known as an Amethyst Steel player now. What do you like about Amethyst Steel? Why does it appeal to you?
Yeah, I just think like Purple Steel is, everyone like says it's the most fair deck in like a derogatory way, but I take that as like the biggest compliment to the deck, where the deck is the most consistent deck in the game. It has like the flattest matchup spread, so you have the most game into every single person you play into, and like your deck lets you down so much less than other people's decks let you down. And the fact that you're always in every game, if you feel like you have an edge on your opponent, and you're playing more like technically precisely, then you can accumulate all of these small advantages throughout the game, and then end up winning games where like you theoretically on paper should not have been favored in.